This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. Our Memorial Day edition begins with a discussion of what Governor Cooper described as a modest Phase 2 for our state's reopening. We'll talk about the crisis at DOT and wonder what it's going to take to fix it. If we've got time, we also want to examine what the legislature is doing about a budget shortfall projected to be in the billions. So, joining us on our panel this week are Becki Gray, Vice President for the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon, Director of the state's Newsroom, Rob Schofield with NC Policy Watch, and John Hood, Syndicated columnist and author. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
If you think you may have COVID-19, please remember, people who are mildly ill are able to recover at home. If possible, stay in a specific sick room and stay in touch with your doctor. Be sure to seek medical care right away if your symptoms become severe, like difficulty breathing. Most important, whether you have mild symptoms or no symptoms, we should all stay home to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
Let's begin the spin. As expected, Governor Cooper announced that the state will enter Phase 2 of its reopening plan. People will be happy to know restaurants can reopen at 50% capacity, but the plan didn't go as far as many had anticipated, and we want our panel to give you their reactions to Phase 2. So I'm going to ask each of you, first of all, give us a letter grade for how well you think Governor Cooper is managing this COVID-19 crisis, and then give us your reaction to Phase 2, if you will, please. Rob Schofield, I'll start with you.
I give him a B+. I think he gets a slight demerit on the fact that I think, if anything, he's moving a little quickly. I talked to a friend who's a COVID ward nurse last night, and she said their numbers are as high as they've been. She's very concerned that we're moving too fast. But I think he's doing what he can to sort of surf public opinion and keep people safe.
Okay. John Hood, give us a grade.
Well, he started out maybe in the B to high C category. He's now fallen well into D. I disagree entirely with Rob. This was a poor decision on his part to pull back from his Phase 2. This is sort of a Phase 1.3 or something like that. It is out of step with what's happening in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. It is not consistent with the data and the description of the data they originally gave us a couple of weeks ago of what's important. I just think it is a blunder.
All right. Becki Gray, give us a grade and tell us about Phase 2.
I'd say he's clearly in the D category right now, and the longer this goes on, it's going to, he's, as John said, this was a blunder. This Phase 2, phase in has been confusing. It's been contradictory. Some businesses are allowed to open, others aren't, and it really doesn't make much sense as to who's excluded and who's included. And I think the longer this goes on, and particularly if this goes on for 5 weeks with this uncertainty, I think he's going to come out of this with a solid F.
Chris Fitzsimon, give us a grade and tell us about Phase 2.
A solid F. Well, the people in North Carolina, 70 to 80% of them think he's doing a good job, so that's the grade that really counts. I'll give him a B+ to even an A-. I think he's got a couple issues. I don't think he's communicating as clearly as he maybe should be. We're going to talk about the unemployment situation. I think that could be handled somewhat better, although I'll point out, spend 5 minutes on Google, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, a lot of other states are having similar problems. Here's how he should be judged. North Carolina's death rate per capita from COVID is in the mid-30s to high 30s. That means we're doing better than all but 10 or 15 states. And every time we're in a public health emergency, the way you judge it is how you judge it after the fact. And everybody says we're going too slow. People are alive because Governor Cooper has been going slow. And this does require nuance, even though it may not be politically helpful and maybe difficult to explain in 30-second sound bites. I think he's doing the right thing.
Rob, we've had the highest 3 days of new cases reported this past week during the whole pandemic. So let's get into this. The restaurants are allowed to reopen so long as they have 50% capacity. Take precautions, keep spacing with chairs and tables apart. Lynn Minges from the hospitality industry was part of making these decisions. She says she doesn't think but about 50% of the restaurants are actually going to open. Why?
Because people are afraid. I mean, I think people are not going to be patronizing those restaurants. And a lot of restaurant owners don't want to put their customers at risk. I mean, the reality is that we are still in the middle of this pandemic. There's an understandable desire on people's part to get out there, to get the economy going. But we're moving too fast is my fear. And I think we're getting ahead of what a lot of other reasonable states are doing. I got an unemployed restaurant worker living in my home who's from New York City right now. And I can tell you they're not opening their restaurants right now.
There are a lot of people that are Becki, watching other states, South Carolina, Georgia particularly. Georgia's been reopened now for 3 weeks. They're questioning the decision why you can reopen restaurants, but you can't reopen bars. What do you think?
I think that's a very good question, and one that Governor Cooper is going to have to answer. It's not only the bars, Tom, but it's also the breweries, the craft breweries, the distilleries, the wineries. We had a vibrant industry growing in North Carolina with those particular parts of, again, the craft breweries and the distilleries particularly, and they have been completely shut down. Many of these were struggling. Many of the restaurants have been struggling. One of the reasons why a lot of the restaurants aren't going to be able to open is because under the continued restrictions of only 50%, they can't make any money. They lose money with those kind of restrictions. So hopefully we're going to be looking at more clearly defining bars, having some allowances for these craft breweries and these distilleries, and also look at things like allowing restaurants to have more outdoor seating. In some states we're seeing where they're closing down some roads in order to allow more pedestrian traffic and to have tables and table seating, not just inside the restaurant, to expand that. So there's some things that certainly can be done to ease these restrictions that the governor has put into place.
John, you've been one who has been critical of this. You gave him a D for his handling of this. So is it your contention that we should just throw open the doors and let everything be open now?
No, but we should be moving much more rapidly. We could be more like Texas. We could be more like South Carolina. These are states that have roughly the same or lower, in Texas's case, death per capita, much more open. We could just be using some common sense, and we should also not be yanking people around. Early in the week, across North Carolina, there were hundreds, thousands of businesses preparing to open, sometimes spending thousands of dollars to set them up, to bring their employees back in. Suddenly on Wednesday, the governor goes back on the original explanation, which is that the case count is not the appropriate measure because it's determined by the amount of testing you do. And you want to look instead at hospitalizations, at the rate of positive tests, which is very low now. And they yanked it back without any explanation. If you are a summer camp, you can open. If you are a gym or a swimming or a basketball court or a dance studio or martial arts facility, you can't open, but you can run a camp. I mean, it's completely arbitrary and capricious. It is poorly worded. It is poorly thought out. They need to start over and get this thing straightened out. 5 weeks of this will be a disaster.
Well, assuming that it lasts 5 weeks, I think the big question, Chris, everybody's asking is, we've got double-digit unemployment in North Carolina. Over 1 million people have filed for unemployment insurance receipts. How long is it going to take, and will this help in restarting this economic engine?
Well, I hope so. Everything's a mixed bag in this. For example, if you're forcing people to go back to work in places that aren't safe, that is in nobody's best interest, and that may mean people are ineligible for unemployment. I do think we have to do much better in getting that money out the door. I think things are improving. But what I find fascinating is that we're all sitting here as if we're all public health experts. We're all reading the same data or different data instead of listening to the experts. For example, the city of Montgomery, Alabama. Alabama has never really closed down very much. The city of Montgomery, Alabama has no more ICU beds in the entire city. You have to be shipped if you're a COVID patient that needs an ICU bed 90 or 100 miles. We have churches that are open in Arkansas where we had a church in Arkansas where a third of the congregation got sick and 3 people died. We could go on and on and on. So the question for Governor Cooper and other people.
What is Arkansas's death rate? What is Arkansas's infection rate?
Texas's
lower
death rate
than North Carolina's.
Texas's
Use
death rate
some
is not
common
much
sense.
Are you going to stop yelling and let me talk or not?
I'm trying to understand what in the world you're talking about. Why are you choosing these examples?
I'm talking about the fact that we open up things. The state of Alabama, the city of Montgomery has no ICU beds. I'm talking about a church in Arkansas where they had an open service and 3 people died. The question in public health is not to sit here and say, oh, Cooper's trying to ruin the economy. Cooper is trying to keep people alive and balance the needs of the economy. That's what everybody ought to be doing instead of using political rhetoric to attack people whose goal is literally to keep people safe and figure out a reasonable, cautious way to do this. And
I did not attack Governor Cooper's intentions. I did not attack his objectives. I attacked his judgment. It is poor. Other states that face similar problems have made different decisions with better results. That's all I'm saying.
Well, why are we in the low 30s in death rate in the country then?
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question. And why are states that are much more restrictive much higher in death rates? Chris, why do you think that is?
Because this is an incredibly complicated virus.
I agree entirely. This is incredibly complicated, so don't pull a single number and say, hey, North Carolina's doing great. Other states with less restrictions.
Like you're doing with Texas
I'm
and
not
other states.
arguing that. I'm rebutting your argument.
Yourself, John.
Becki, I think we should go out for a cup of coffee and come back later. What do you think?
I'm up for a Bloody Mary. Yeah, if only the bars were open.
Rob, there was some discussion this week about possibly the motivation of Governor Cooper for being so slow in reopening is because he really doesn't want the Republican National Convention to be held in Charlotte, and he is trying to do everything he can to keep President Trump and the convention from. Your reaction to that?
I think it's utterly preposterous. Governor Cooper isn't worried about the Republican convention in Charlotte. He's worried about saving people's lives. And the hard reality is that more people are going to die. Some people say it's too slow. The experts I've talked to, the woman I talked to last night, who's a nurse in a COVID ward here in the Triangle, who's seen her numbers as high as they've been. They just peaked yesterday.
Yeah.
She said, this is moving too fast. More people are going to die. Hundreds of people are likely going to die because we're moving very quickly.
So now you see why we've got B pluses and Ds in rating this thing. I think it's helped examine that. I want to move on.
One thing that I think has to be pointed out is there are real health hazards and health consequences the longer that this economic shutdown goes on. As people are out of work with mental health issues, with substance abuse, I mean, the health concerns on the economic side are not insubstantial.
Right. I need to move on to another crisis that's taking place. The Department of Transportation is definitely in crisis. Cash shortfalls have caused the cancellation of projects. Internal projections show that we're going to have a shortfall of some $300 million by the close of this fiscal year, June 30th. The state auditor recently released a scathing report of mismanagement of $742. And just this week, the department announced they were going to be enforcing furloughs, unpaid leave on most employees. John, for many months, our legislators have been citing problems at DOT. What's it going to take to fix them?
Well, there has been some change in leadership. I think that needs to continue. The governor should be more focused on this than he is. They'll understand why he's distracted, but this is a major problem. And people have sort of been talking past each other saying, well, this is not because of mismanagement. It's because of the MAP Act settlement. It's because of the effects of hurricanes on the budget. That's all true and not the point. Faced with those challenges, DOT did not manage their numbers, their expenditures properly and got it over their heads. That's what happened. The state auditor's report, other reports are clear about it. There was some initial attempts to deny it, but they basically stopped denying it at this point. And the legislature and the administration need to get back on track quickly.
Yeah, DOT has agreed with the findings, they said. They say they have fixed many of these problems. Chris, how can we be sure? What needs to happen for us to have confidence in DOT's management?
Well, I mean, we have an oversight process in place. We have the legislative committees. We have government operations committees. I do think that we need to take all this thing. The governor needs to do a better job. DOT needs to do a better job. I was a little surprised that $600 million in payments from the MAP Act was barely addressed at all in the audit. I'm not saying that explains everything, but if you're going to have a comprehensive look at this, I do think that's an important thing. And nobody's disagreeing, I don't think, on the right or the left, that the MAP Act payments should have been made. But that's a big hit for an agency that is under the stresses that John mentioned from the hurricane, from declining revenues. It doesn't excuse some of the problems they've had, but I think we have to take this as a whole picture, not just individual items.
Becki, you hang around the legislature quite a bit. It wasn't, 2 years ago that our legislators were chiding DOT because they had $1 billion in the bank, and they said DOT wasn't spending it enough and fast enough, and they wanted to get moving on projects. What role did the legislature have in all this crisis?
Well, I think this is a long-standing problem, and I think to blame it on the legislature is really short-sighted. You mentioned Beth Wood's scathing audit. Beth Woods also testified before a committee at the General Assembly this week and had even more scathing remarks to make. The thing that really stood out to me is she explained that this had been going on through 3 administrations, that the entire time that she has been the state auditor, this has been the situation. So this is not a result of one thing or another thing. It isn't a result of just the MAP Act payments that are being made, not just the hurricane recovery. This has been going on for many years
and not
through
just
different
the Cooper,
administrations.
Just not the Cooper administration. There was an article in the News and Observer this past week, Rob, that said we ought to just totally revamp the Department of Transportation from beginning to end, beginning with the assumptions for what we need to be doing and where the revenue streams need to. What do you think of that?
That's a great column. Kim Hunter, who's an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, said, look, it's time to rethink this endless commitment to just building more and more lanes on superhighways. There's no way to meet the demand. The statistics show that when you build more lanes, more traffic comes. We've got to renew our commitment to transit, to attacking the climate crisis and carbon pollution. This is a perfect opportunity to do that. This, as Becki notes, this has been going on for decades. I feel sort of like Claude Rains. I'm shocked to find out that there's corruption and mismanagement going on in the Department of Transportation.
John, one of the things that Beth mentioned, which I have not seen reported anywhere or discussed anywhere, was $4.8 billion that's been borrowed in what they call Garvey bonds.
Yes.
They are anticipating the revenues that are going to be coming in to the State Department of Transportation. With what's going on now, people not driving, the gas prices being lowered, those Garvey bonds, this is an unfunded liability on our balance sheet, is it not?
Well, it's a liability. Again, that is not something the Cooper administration began.
No,
we've been bargaining against revenue
not.
for some time. I don't think anybody expected the kind of collapse in highway-derived revenue that came from the COVID-19 crisis. But that is money that's going to have to be paid from future receipts, either from federal receipts or from motorists.
Right. Chris, comment on the fact that they're furloughing employees. Some employees are having to take 30 hours of unfunded leave, some 20 hours of unfunded leave. They say this is going to save $7 million in the current budget, but they got a $300 million budget hole. What do you think of these furloughs?
Well, I mean, any effort to reduce the budget hole is welcome. I do think they are at least making the folks at the top of the pyramid at DOT, the wealthy or the higher paid employees, participate in this initially or first more than the low paid workers. But we're not going to solve this with furloughs at this point. But we have to have a fundamental restructuring of DOT. I do think that's a good idea, and I hope we can do this. Maybe it's time for a bipartisan commission to study this for a year. If we need to deal with the immediate problems of oversight, but we do need to rework this whole agency, and we have for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. We do need to rework this agency. I think that during this legislative session, you're going to see some real changes. We may see some changes as to the way the DOT board is appointed. We may see some financial things done. We've got to shore it up, but I think that shoring it up and any money that goes to the Department of Transportation is going to come with some real strings attached, having to to do with
Yeah,
accountability and oversight. But at the end of the day, this is the governor's thing, and the buck stops with the governor. It's his
but I
agency.
think, no, this is a long-standing problem. You said this. You said this before, and just changing the way we appoint the DOT board is like pouring another gallon of water down Niagara Falls. When you've got a revenue scheme that depends so heavily on gasoline taxes to fund your department, you got problems in River City, and we got to go back and rethink this whole thing. I need to switch gears again, if I can, please. You wouldn't be forgiven. You would be forgiven for not knowing our legislature's been back in session, but our lawmakers are at work, and one of the main topics that they've been discussing is how they're going to deal with a projected shortfall that Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger says is going to be in the billions of dollars. Becki, we knew there was going to be problems, but on Monday, the legislative leaders said that revenue shortfalls caused mostly by the coronavirus was billions of dollars. So they're debating what to do, including spending reserves, cutting the state workforce. I haven't heard anything about a tax increase. What are you hearing over there?
Well, a lot of things. Number one, I don't think there'll be a tax increase. I think that is absolutely the worst thing that we could do given the economic situation that the state is in. I mean, with over 1 million unemployment claims being made, with businesses barely getting by, I think to increase taxes is something that should not even be considered. They're going to have to rein in spending. We're not going to have the revenue coming in. These are unprecedented times. We're also going to, we do have, thank goodness, we do have some savings set aside. When you add everything together, it's probably close to $4, maybe even $5 billion of different pots of savings and reserve money that you could get to. But, we don't want to spend all of that. So it's going to be very, very tight. And
Rob, one of the things that they're talking about is they've had a 16% drop in revenue. Now, they've also allowed taxpayers not to have to pay their state income taxes until July 15th. We've got a state budget that needs to be determined between now and July 1st, presumably. Is that going to happen?
It's going to be very difficult. I think there needs to be a desperate clamoring, bipartisan clamoring from Republicans and Democrats in North Carolina to the federal government. We need much more federal aid to states. The last thing we really need to do is to start slashing state government and firing people and laying off teachers and laying off transportation workers and, prison guards. What the data show from the last recession is that to the extent states reduce their spending, reduce their investments, that makes the recession worse. We've got to focus on keeping people employed, keeping the state government in the business of keeping the economy moving, and I think it'll be a big mistake to cut.
Chris, Rob talks about getting help from Congress. We know the House has passed a bill to help local and state governments so far as, because these budget shortfalls are happening in every branch of government just about everywhere. The Senate has balked at that. Where do things now stand on that issue?
Well, the House has passed a $3 trillion plan. There were news reports that the White House and the Senate Republican leadership don't want to go over $1 trillion, but whatever you think of the amounts, that actually signals to me that they're going to do something. That in between those two amounts probably will be what will pass. And I do think the pressure will be, there are a lot of Republican governors and Republican legislators around the country who see the writing on the wall. It's not just liberal Democratic governors. I think there will be some aid to the states. The question is how much, when it will come, and how it will be distributed.
John, it seems that our crises have crises, if you will. Another one of the issues the legislature is really discussing is the unemployment insurance and the Employment Security Commission, and the fact that we have 1 million people who have filed for unemployment insurance, and so far we've only got about 60% of them who are actually receiving benefits. They say that the administration has not responded to this very well. What's your take on this unemployment insurance thing?
The administration has not responded to it very well. I've heard that phrase before.
I heard that somewhere.
To be fair again, this is a problem across the country. North Carolina went into this mess with a fairly low rate of speedy payment. It is not improved. It may actually still be one of the worst in the country. I don't know. But it's another thing the Cooper administration has got to get its hands around. This and the budget, which, in previous recessions, previous run-ups to recessions, previous governors have taken a lot more decisive action to control spending and prepare for a fiscal problem. As far as I know, the Cooper administration is not doing that. So on this and many other matters,
I got
with
1
the
minute
program,
left in
please.
show. So let me get a real quick reaction from you, Chris. Senate President Pro Tem Berger says there's no point in raising the unemployment weekly benefits if we can't get the benefits to them to begin with, right?
Well, I think that I hope we're ironing that out. That doesn't follow to me, because at some point the benefits will go out and people need more help. As John says, this is happening in almost every state in the country.
All right, I got to close this down. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Folks, this was great conversation, and I thank you for listening to the Spin this week. To stay informed all during the week, be sure to read our weekly newsletter. Next week, Brad Crone is going to be sitting in this chair. Until that time, happy Memorial Day, stay informed, and watch out for the Spin.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
If you think you may have COVID-19, please remember, people who are mildly ill are able to recover at home. If possible, stay in a specific sick room and stay in touch with your doctor. Be sure to seek medical care right away if your symptoms become severe, like difficulty breathing. Most important, whether you have mild symptoms or no symptoms, we should all stay home to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.